Turning a bad trip into a good one. Have you ever wondered why some people never recover from a bad trip after they've opened up Pandora's box and just can't seem to close it? They might have even turned from an optimistic, joyful person into this gloomy pessimist. Life sucks, it's hard, what the fuck? Ugh. Paralyzed by fear. Yet others emerge from this traumatic experience stronger, wiser and healthier than they were before. Why do some people thrive from traumatic experiences like war and others turn into a lifelong drug addiction because their father didn't pay attention to them? And how can you turn a devastating psychedelic or life traumatic trip into a positive one where you can actually grow and thrive from it? That is the question. In this video, we're going to be diving into mental transmutation and how to transform a negative experience into something positive that you can use to level up your character. Once upon a time, there were these two brothers. They grew up with this alcoholic father who emotionally and physically abused them. Oftentimes I'd go to school with a black eye or bruised arms and I would have to lie about it to the teachers just out of fear to not get beaten. And as I grew up, as you would imagine, for example, one of the brothers, he turned into a life of alcoholism. Every day drinking whiskey to drown his sorrows. And someone asked him, why did you turn to this life of alcoholism and depression? And he responds, well, yeah, of course I'm an alcoholic. My father was one. This was the environment that I grew up in. Now, the other brother who grew up in the exact same environment, he grew up incredibly wealthy and successful. He built multiple businesses and dedicated his life to help people, even donating a lot of money to people struggling with alcoholism. He deeply cared about people. And someone asked him, hey, why did you turn to this life? He's like, well, of course I turned out this way. My father was an alcoholic. Now, the moral of the story is that it's not the life situation that you find yourself in that causes you to go from this path or that path. It's the narrative that you tell yourself. It's the meaning that you assign your story. They say that 50 to 70% of people will experience a trauma at some point in their life. You could actually argue that it's 100%, but of course there are different degrees of trauma. Most of us are unaware of many traumas that happen. Being born is one example. Very traumatic experience, getting ripped from this warm environment where you're cozy and safe, and then a doctor in a white lab coat and a sterilized, bright white room is just and smacks you on the ass so you cry. Like, dude.
Ah, another beautiful day in the womb.
Our first moment of entering this outside world is traumatic. That's just life. Look around in nature. There's death and suffering all around us. Even something as simple as your mother telling you to be quiet when you were 8 can be traumatic. Yeah, of course, your 8-year-old subconscious mind doesn't understand the complexity of social dynamics, and objectively your mother told you to be quiet because you were disturbing a nice social gathering. But inside, your subconscious mind interpreted the situation as, my mother doesn't love me, and you shift your personality as a people pleaser until adulthood. Or whatever. It could just be one little tiny, like nothing situation, a word or a sentence that someone says to you, and your subconscious mind interprets it in a way that forever shifts your personality, and this is especially true when you're a kid. The point is, the subconscious mind can interpret certain situations and make an entire story out of it. And depending on the story that you tell yourself, will determine your personality, your mental state, your emotional well-being. I say this because it's important to be reminded that it's not necessarily the intensity of trauma that matters most, but how you process it. We live in this victim mentality generation where we flaunt our traumas like a fetish, justifying our shitty personalities. We identify with mental disorders, like, oh yes. We don't even say, I have depression. We say, I'm depressed. We don't say, this anxiety feeling is flowing through me. We say, I'm anxious. I have ABC syndrome. Oh, really? I have XYZ syndrome. Oh, yes, my father had that. Oh, yes, that explains a lot. I'm not dismissing mental disorders, but you gotta be very careful with just clinging onto this and then putting it as just mask and costume, like, yes, this is who I am now. I get brownie points and get pity. And I can justify certain shitty behaviors, like, no, leave him alone, he's depressed. And I think this is the essence of lingering trauma, which is pointing and blaming at the external. instead of taking responsibility. This is step number one. Even if it's not your fault, which in many cases isn't, you still need to take responsibility. I mean, clearly you have no control when you're a 5-year-old kid and what happened to you, but it did happen. No matter how traumatic it was, it's like you gotta take responsibility for it as an adult. And we'll get into the psychedelic trips. It's just that I feel like I need to build some context and a foundation of how processing trauma works. I think most of us knows by now about Carl Jung psychology and shadow work and dealing and processing with your unconscious patterns and not falling into this victim mentality and being overly identified with our persona, because that's when these repressed, ugly sides of our personality can bubble up and they come out in different ways. There was a young man who was imprisoned for his religious affiliation. His family was taken from him and brutally murdered. His loving soulmate, his parents, they gave him life. Not just taken, but killed in a horrendous way. This shattered this man's soul. He was broken. He was lost. He had no hope. At this point, death would have been a mercy, but instead he was taken to a prisoner camp where he would be starved, forced to labor, and beaten all day, every day. All his friends were imprisoned and stripped from their humanity. This man witnessed countless of his friends murdered, beaten, and taken into gas chambers. Their entire purpose was to be tortured and dehumanized. They were even experimented on with dangerous medical procedures, like they were rats in a cage. This man's response to these inhumane conditions was to focus on the internal freedom to choose one's attitude towards the circumstances. His external situation was out of his control, and his inner mind was in his control. This man was Viktor Frankl, who was tortured in concentration camps for years. Yet he developed the theory of logotherapy in his famous book, Man's Search for Meaning, arguing that the primary drive in human life is not pleasure, as Freud had suggested, nor power, as Adler had suggested, but the pursuit of what he called meaning. According to Frankl, even in the direst circumstances, a person can find meaning in life, and thus a reason to continue living. Frankl's story, while marked by brutality and loss, is ultimately a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the capacity to find meaning and growth in the face of suffering. So in one short word, it's meaning that will get you out of a bad trip. Think about all the people who jump off buildings every single day. And while, yes, I'm sure they've gone through intense suffering, but I doubt that their whole family got tortured and murdered. Maybe their wife left them. And that's enough to... Sometimes it's billionaires who gain so much wealth and power that they reach the top, and then it's like, what now? They lose meaning, and then it's always a loss of meaning. And the nihilists can argue that there is no meaning to life, inherent meaning anyway, and I'm not here to argue and to try to convince you like, no, there is meaning. I mean, look. That doesn't work, because human beings, we're emotional creatures, whether you want to admit it or not. It's just, guys like to pride themselves on being rational and logical, but we're all emotional. And whether or not there is inherent meaning in the universe is irrelevant, because the fact of the matter is that the meaning that you create in your mind drastically affects your reality. It affects your emotions, it affects your perception, and it affects how your life turns out, how you carry yourself into everyday situations. I mean, I know what it feels like, man, to completely dive into that nihilistic hole. For those who've been following my channel, you know I had this horrendous, most traumatic experience of my life, which ripped my soul into shreds. And I had no choice. Like, I was at that point where I'm like, well, either I have to turn this into a positive experience and derive some meaning from it, or I might actually just end up killing myself. I don't know. It was actually that dark. And so I chose, of course, what is it, the former or the latter? I don't even remember what I said. But obviously I chose meaning. I chose, all right, let's get through this. Even though I suffered and cried and I was so... it sucked. I don't even want to talk about it because I'm too traumatized. Nah, I'm joking. And I'm not special. I'm a human being just like everyone watching. We all have the power to let go of emotional charge that is kind of sinking us into this dark, deep feeling, you know? Sometimes it can be difficult to get over a traumatic experience, and I think it's very dangerous to judge on the outside of like the intensity. You know, some people do this. I noticed this when whenever I talk about my cannabis addiction. Just for as an example, you're always going to get someone like, I've been through meth addiction. What you've gone through is, you know what I mean? Like, as soon as you start to compare your trauma and like, I've gone through worse than what you have, therefore you shouldn't complain. Like, mate, that's a fucking dark reality. Don't want to ever compare your suffering to someone else. Same with your successes, because we're all in a different space, and what you see on the outside isn't necessarily accurate to how they're feeling on the inside. Now, I'm not saying that the outside doesn't matter. I mean, clearly, like, for example, now if I had this hobo beard and holes in my shirt and you could see stink lines from me and my shoulders were like this and my voice was like you can judge very easily sometimes that, like, okay, this guy's clearly doesn't seem to be in a good place right now. But sometimes they're going to be mysterious puzzle pieces that you can only see from the inside of the mind. So I've gone through many traumatic experiences with varying intensities, and sometimes you can go through just a little tiny trauma that affects you more than like this huge trauma that will be like, Tom, shit, are you alright? I'm like, yeah, I'm good, relax. It's like, you're more upset. Like, I had a friend of mine a few months ago got diagnosed with cancer. I was like, Tom, shit, man, are you alright? And he's like, my other mate, Tom. He was like, well, yeah, man, what are you going to do? It's out of your control. And he had such a zen attitude about it. It was really inspiring. And then I see other people who, they're looking forward to this video game or this movie, and it gets announced that it's delayed, and their genuine reaction is like, oh, fucking hell. You know what I mean? So imagine someone reacting that way to a movie or a video game getting delayed, or someone cutting them off in traffic, or something so mundane, you know, something so trivial. And then compare that to my mate who had this fucking crazy traumatic experience with this thing that's literally trying to kill him from the inside, and he's like, what are you gonna do? I'll do what I can, but I'm not gonna stress myself over it. It's done. And of course, he did get the surgery, and it's in remission, and it's all good, right? So your mental framework is so important when it comes to life and going through challenging experiences. And this is all related to having a bad trip, because a psychedelic trip, or psychedelics in general, you could argue, are amplifiers or non-specific amplifiers of human consciousness. So many times these bad trips is something looming in your psyche that gets brought up to the surface. The only difference with psychedelics is that it makes it more theatrical and dramatic. So like a little trauma could just blow up into this massive thing, into demons and monsters and, you know, the satanic matrix and the empty void of existence and all that kind of stuff, you know. I've touched on all these experiences, and at the time I was broken. I was so angry at this experience, man. There was one time where, if you notice, I deleted a lot of my psychedelic content because I thought, I started to project and make this story out of it, like, maybe psychedelics are evil. Maybe there are these entities using my body as a puppet so they can control it. Now, this is where your mind goes to when it doesn't want to take responsibility and accept that, no, this is 100% my fault. It's within my psyche. And I went through a dark place, but I allowed it to, you know, my psyche just had to process these traumatic experiences in any way it could. To go back on something that I touched on earlier, is that sometimes a big trauma might not actually faze you that much because of your mentality, because of the story that you tell around it. And sometimes something little can happen. I remember when I was a kid, I got a yellow Game Boy Color and I was upset. I remember chucking a tantrum. I don't like the color yellow. Could you imagine? And then other times I've been kidnapped and kind of forced to do not so very nice things. I mean, like, yeah, it was kind of messed up, but I kind of brushed it aside. Like, I was an idiot. I shouldn't have put myself in that situation. You know what I mean? And then now I just use it as a story. It's a fucking cool story. And that's kind of my attitude towards it now. Like, whenever something really heavy happens to me, I think, well, at least it's a story. Your trauma and suffering can be an inspiration story for someone else.
I wish none of this had happened.
So do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us. There are other forces at work in this world, Ruda, besides the will of evil.
This all goes back to meaning, because we are going through a meaning crisis. I believe this is why depression and suicide is raising at an alarming rate. And I've been in that space before. It's a dark and heavy place. Your mind goes to unfathomable, twisted places. You get desperate. When you don't have a unifying, meaningful story that you feel you're a part of, then there's not much purpose of you being here. So right now, if you're in the belly of the beast, you're in this storm and you just want to get past it, here's a few things that I could suggest to ease the symptoms. Number one is change the setting. Sometimes a change of environment can be the difference between a good mood and a bad mood. 2, use grounding techniques. Get out of your head. Deep breathing. Go on barefoot in nature. Engage in reassuring dialogue. This means talk to someone. If you don't have access to talk to someone, then do some positive self-talk, some affirmations. Even if you have to do something corny like watching a motivational Tony Robbins video or sign up to one of his courses, go to one of those seminars. I'm telling you, man, that it's like a cheat code to changing your state. It's very difficult to rewrite your story when you're in a low emotional state, because like when I'm in here, like I'm in this depressed frequency, and it doesn't matter what I write, even if I try to bullshit myself, like I'm not gonna believe it because my emotions are here. So sometimes you gotta, you know what I mean, like jump up and down, dance, fucking get a cold shower, do a sprint up a mountain, fuck, I don't know, do what you gotta do to change your state. Hijack your mind by getting into your body, and then from that place, this is what Tony Robbins talks about all the time, then you go into, and of course if you need to, go get some professional help. This can be through a therapist or some coaching. I tend to go towards more the coaching route, where it's more focusing on a goal and lifting you up versus trying to figure out why you're depressed because your mother said this to you when you were 4 years old. It's like, because that kind of stuff, like I've gone down that rabbit hole, and like, yeah, it can be useful, but sometimes just talking about your traumas and finding out why your mother did this or why you held on to this trauma doesn't necessarily help you let it go. It can help, that's like one step, right? Which is the awareness, which I'm going to get into in just a moment. What I would really recommend, honestly, that if you're in the throes of it right now and you're struggling to process some of these heavier emotions, is number one, read David R. Hawkins' book, Letting Go. Absolutely game-changing. RIP. I'm going to give you the layman cheat sheet version of his letting go process, which is awareness, acceptance, surrender. First step, awareness. First, place your awareness to the physical sensations associated with your painful emotion, whether it's sadness, anger, despair, misery, shame, whatever it is. When I say putting your awareness on this emotion, it's not in this mental space. It's not, oh yes, I feel sad because my wife left me. It's important not to judge it, not to identify with this emotion. Think of emotions as energies flowing through you rather than you being the thing. That's why early in this video I said, dangerous how people say, I'm depressed. Like, yes, depression is me. Don't do that. For the love of God, don't do that. Some people may think that, okay, this is just semantic, but your subconscious doesn't know the difference. And semantics could be the difference of the program that you've kept installed and kept running. That's why it's a whole different beast when you say, maybe I have depression, or depression is flowing through me, or I feel depression. But even depression is very abstract. When I say become aware of these emotions, it's really more becoming aware of the physical sensations associated with these emotions. Depression and anxiety, these are abstract, these are subjective, these are stories. Because what is anxiety really? I'm not dismissing it. I understand that, there's a thing called anxiety disorder and all that. But if you really think about it, what is anxiety? Like sensation-wise, because I want you to move out from the subjective to more objective awareness of these sensations. So what might happen when you have anxiety? Increased heart rate, maybe sweaty palms, shallow breathing in the chest, maybe a tension in the neck, a sort of pressure. These are all objective observations. You can't deny this. I feel like my heart rate has increased. Like, that's not just a made-up story made in your mind. That's a physical reaction to this emotion. So let's say you're feeling fear and anxiety. Pay attention to this and try to hone it into the place where you feel it the most. It could be, like a tension in your trapezius or something, like right here. Where is the source of this anxiety, at least physically speaking? Second step is acceptance. Pay attention to your physical sensations and breathe into your diaphragm. Don't try to get rid of the emotion. Accept it. Feel it fully. It's there for a reason. Fighting your emotions like it's a parasite only makes it resist more. It makes it stronger. Fully accept it and give it space. Cry if you have to. If it's sadness overwhelming your body, sink into it, until you, even if it makes it more powerful at that moment. And then you go through a few cycles of this, then you go to the third step, which is surrender. So the next few rounds, you basically let it go by breathing deeply in and out the nose, nice and slowly. This is surrendering by not only physical relaxation, but letting go mentally. A nice hack I like to add into this mix is envisioning that I'm breathing in a white light that's filling up my entire body, and then breathing out black smoke. I'm borrowing this from other spiritual practices. It might be the ADD mind that helps us kind of envision this thing to focus, but you don't have to do this. And this letting go process, it's not necessarily just going to fix your emotions right there and you're never going to be traumatized like it's this magic pill. It doesn't work that way. But at the very least, it will make you feel better. At the very least, it will start to discharge this emotion, and it depends on where you are and how severe this trauma is. Sometimes it might take a while. Sometimes you can process through this emotions immediately and let it go. And it's like, oh, nice. Post-psychedelic integrations, whether they're bad or they're good, but especially if they're challenging, and we have to distinguish between a bad trip and a challenging trip, because a bad trip is one that tends to traumatize someone and their life gets worse afterwards. Well, the challenging trip is difficult in the moment during the trip, but then afterwards you're like, oh, thank God that happened and made me realize this and that. But it's not the same for everyone. But that being said, this is the meaning and the approach that you take afterwards. Because even if you have the worst, most severe bad trip ever, I think it's a healthier mindset to try to turn it into something good than to cling on to, oh, this is horrible. It just doesn't help from a practical standpoint. So the first thing you want to do after integration is immediate post self-care. Don't rush off to regular life. That's why having a day or two after a challenging experience can be very useful. Take it easy, rest, drink water, journal, write, talk with friends. Don't do anything that's too intensive physically or mentally or emotionally. Just take it easy. Let the experience absorb by marinating in it. There's this dream hack where if you recently wake up from a dream and you immediately move your body, it's actually much, much harder to remember your dreams. Whereas if you wake up from a dream and you just stay completely still, it's so much easier to still be in that space. So you can borrow this technique to post-integration, and that's don't move too much. Not like literally, but just don't do anything too crazy. Let yourself marinate in that experience. Write down, really, because trust me, you might think it's super memorable, but down the track, you might forget a lot of things. So write it down, journal, join a community, a group, get professional help, a therapist, a coach, or someone to talk to and help you process this experience, to concretize these insights into reality. Read a self-help book. Learn to be more productive. Get yourself in the routine. Oh, Jesus, Felix, get the shit out of me. Ooh, sometimes a cat walking in. Oh, it's a mini trauma. Ooh, might have to do the letting go process, you little bastard. He opened my door. Dude. That was scary. Ooh. So, I lost my train of thought here. So yeah, also creative expression, very helpful. Whether through making videos, photography, painting, dancing, making music, learning new music. But I think it's very potent to take advantage of that post-psychedelic trip and take advantage of that momentum. You know what I mean? Don't say the words, I'll do it tomorrow. No, just take advantage while you're in this space, especially if you're feeling motivated to make changes in your life. Do it now, Install that in your brain, because psychedelics don't give you anything. The best thing that it can do is show you a glimpse, and then depending on how you take that glimpse, that insight, whether you run with it immediately or not, it's going to make all the difference. It's like a creative idea that comes to mind. If you don't write it down, it's going to piss off into the ether. It's never going to come back. Same with dreams. And I think writing down is that's one step. One small, little, tiny step. Then you take action towards. But I think community is huge when it comes to this. But anyways, I think this video is getting a bit too long, so I'm going to end it at that. I hope that I gave you some insight that maybe gave you a new perspective on integration and transmuting bad experiences into good ones and reframing and meaning and all that kind of stuff. So if you enjoyed this, you like this kind of content, subscribe, like, share this video around. Catch you next time. See you on the other side. Peace.